This is AJ Otjen. Please tune in with Kim's podcast, and we'll talk about Burned Over, the survival of Montana firefighter Dan Steffensen.
Welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're here. You're going to be so happy that you're here because I've got a guest today that you're going to want to meet and you're going to want to hear the story. It is heart-wrenching and triumphant and so amazing, and you're going to love it. I'm Kim Sorrelle. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I get to do a lot of fun things in life. My favorite by far is meeting people, and I get to meet some of the most incredible people. And today is absolutely no exception to that. This incredible lady has agreed to be on the show, and I'm so happy to have you. AJ, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to get into, the story that is so unbelievable, and so amazing. But first, I want people to know you. So I want to hear about 8-year-old AJ.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I went to college in Missouri, and then Colorado, and then I finally got my PhD in Missouri while I was I worked full time in the corporate world for 25 years, got my MBA and my PhD in night school, working full time. And so then I retired because I was tuckered out and became a professor and moved to Montana. So I've been in Montana for over 20 years, being a professor at Montana State. And that's, I was doing academic writing, as all professors have to do. And I started creative writing about 10 years ago. I met Dan Steffensen because my students were doing a marketing campaign to promote fundraising for personal protective equipment for firefighters. That's what Dan was wearing when he was burned over. If he had not been wearing it, he would have died. And so he was the star of our campaign, saying, everybody please contribute so all firefighters can have this equipment and everybody has a chance to survive. And so that's where I met him. And he had read a couple of my books, and he said, would you write my book? And I went, oh, okay, well, I've never written a nonfiction novel before. In fact, my books were all children's books, or I wrote a column for the Billings Gazette. I said, I'm really good with 2,000 words, Dan. So this was 40,000 words and took 2.5 years. But I agreed to do it. I volunteered to do it because it was, you volunteer for firefighter things. And it was a long, emotional, difficult thing to do, but we started out and it got done. And it is, like you said, an inspiring, emotional story. I'm glad I did it. It took everything I had to get it done, but it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life. So
yeah, that's amazing.
I'm happy.
So when you were growing up, did you play school? Like, did you always know that you wanted to write? Did you always know that someday this is where you'd be? No.
I mean, I always loved the mountains and riding horses and skiing. So I always did want to, move west and live the life I'm living now. So that I did want. I'll tell you something kind of funny. In high school, I was a cheerleader. I was not the most coordinated cheerleader. I mean, everybody could do back handsprings but me. So I stood in the middle and kind of held my hands up and went, yay. And while everybody did back handsprings. But I was very good at drawing cougars on posters and coming up with slogans, go Cougars, whatever, win state. And I really enjoyed, drawing and writing slogans. And that made me realize that maybe I should be in marketing and advertising. And that is what I did in college. And that ended up being what I did in my career for 25 years. And now I teach marketing and advertising in college. So I did go that way pretty early because I was a cheerleader, and I did slogans and drawings for Ada, Oklahoma Cougars. So if anybody from Ada sees that, they'll go, oh yeah, I remember that. And that sort of inspired me to go that direction, if that helps. So And I'm still doing that. I mean, like I said, we were working on an ad campaign for, the calendars for the firefighters. So I still, but now I teach how to do it, and that's my students were doing the campaign. And I still draw a little bit. I mean, some of the children's books that I started with were my illustrations, but I don't do that anymore. Now I actually hire, I'm the advisor to the Indigenous students on campus, and actually all of my children's books are with the Apsalika Crow tribe and their stories, and getting them into the curriculum in the local schools. And two of our books are in the curriculum. One of them was chosen for the Library of Congress, and it wasn't my illustrations. It was because we use actual Crow artists. In fact, the last one was with Kevin Red Star, who's a national treasure. If anybody wants to look Kevin Red Star up, he's a fabulous artist. So that's why our children's books have become quite wonderful because of the artists we use for them. So, and that's what Dan saw. That's what Dan saw when he said, "Would you write my book?" And I thought, this is nothing like what I've been doing, but it's like I said, it's my first nonfiction novel. Yeah. So
yeah. Well,
yeah.
the big tie-in though, of course, is you're a storyteller, right? Like you're telling stories in the children's books, telling people stories, and then telling Dan's story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's my, I sort of have a theme of courage and Montana and nature throughout all of my books, and family. And this definitely was a story of courage and family and Montana. So there were some similarities, and off we went. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. So things tie together, whether you think they're going to tie together or not. They somehow all come together. Yeah. So just. Is there like one of your children's books that you're like, oh my gosh, this is my favorite, and because the story?
It would be the one with Kevin Red Star. It's called Elk Morning, which is that's our fictitious character, Elk Morning at the Battle of Arrow Creek. And that battle is a real event. It's one of the most important events in Crow history. And so we put our fictitious character in the Battle of Arrow Creek. And that's the one that Kevin Red Star gave us his paintings to be the background of the story. And that was the one that was chosen by the Library of Congress. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. So Elk Morning at the Battle of Arrow Creek. Yeah, so it's a beautiful book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be my favorite. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was fun to do. What got you started in children's books, in writing?
My students, my Indigenous students, we compete in a club called the American Indigenous Business Leaders. They have a business plan competition every year, which we won it 6 times, and it's a national competition. Thank you. This was one of our business plans, was to do a publishing company for children's books, because there weren't any American Indian publishing, children's books publishing companies. So when we went to the competition, we actually created our first book for the competition, and said, we're going to launch a publishing company. Here's an example of what we'll publish. So we actually created the first book and presented it. And people were blown away, and we won that competition. And so when the girls graduated, the 4 of us actually said, well, let's create a company and let's do more. Let's create more. Let's produce more children's books. And that's how it got started. Yeah. So, and I had illustrated, I was free. I illustrated that first one, and I illustrated the second and third one. But after that, we said, these are really good and people like them, but to make them really good, we really need to be using pro artists for these books. Not little on me, but let's get some really great artwork in here, because if they're going to be Crow books, they need to be Crow artists. And that's how we went in the direction of making them really spectacular books that are now in the Montana school curriculum. Yeah.
Wow. That's so
we
cool.
Just kept getting better. We just kept getting better at it. Yeah. We kept getting better and better at doing it. So.
Yeah. It sounds like they need to be outside of into other school districts too.
Well, I agree, but every state likes to focus on their own tribes, their local tribes. And so our tribe, one of our biggest tribes in Montana, is the Apsalika Crow. And so that's why it's so popular here. So we thought that we could do tribes for each state. And so we'd be happy to do that. But we would want the local tribe to provide a local storyteller and a local artist. So and every state does need to do that for their area tribes, I think. You need to be tribally specific. That's the key. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that would be a wonderful thing. That'd be a great project.
We would love to do it. We would love to do it. Yes.
Yeah. I bet.
Mm-hmm.
I bet.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so cool. I love it. So you were working on this calendar for the firefighters, and you met Dan. And
well, the calendar campaign, the firefighters
calendar campaign
calendar with the pictures. They had pictures of fires that they had taken, and they were amazing pictures. So they produced the calendar. We produced the campaign for the calendar. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And so Dan was just part of it. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, he was the star of it. It was a really great campaign. I mean, we created a wonderful, creative message, and he stood up, and he was sort of the voiceover, and then stood up at the end, and everybody knew who Dan was, because the whole community, the whole town, the whole state had been praying for him to live and survive and come home. So it was, to use him as the star and say, I'm Dan Steffensen, be sure and buy these calendars so everybody has a chance to survive like I did. So having him as the star was wonderful. Mm-hmm. And and he did a great job. I mean, he had a great voice, and he 1 or 2 takes, and he stood up and did it well. I was so proud of him. And then later we did a PR campaign with all the local news stations and radio stations. And I shepherded him around to all of them, to say, to show him how to, deal with radio people and TV people, and, get him there on time and hook it all up. And he did a great job. He was really good on camera and with radio, doing radio interviews. And so, that was just part of it. And he was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So. That's so cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to tell his story.
Mm. Well, by then we had started working on the book, and we became good friends by then, but we had to become incredibly close friends to do this book. He had to tell me things that he had never told anybody. And he's admitted to people in interviews. When we launched our book, we did another media tour with TV stations and radio stations. And we were, by then we were old pros at it. And he said in those interviews, he said, AJ knows more about me than anybody else, which I'm not sure he likes, but, because I had to pry him open to get him to tell me his feelings, which he does not share. He's a tough guy and doesn't share his emotions. And, and I write about this in the book, about when he was hurt. He didn't think he was hurt. He wouldn't admit that he was hurt. He would not ask for help. And they're getting him into the ambulance. And he's like, I'm not hurt. Leave me alone. I don't need to go to the ambulance. They're flying him to Utah because he's 60% of his body is burned, 3rd-degree burns.
Yeah. So
he's just not admitting that he's hit.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So he went to a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, he was at a fire. It was a little bitty fire. And I talk, before I get to that fire in the book, I talk a lot about the community, the landscape, how fires happen, his training, because he was a senior firefighter, how, all the firefighters in his firehouse, and how and what it's like to get a radio call, why they were there, because I wanted to know why this senior well-trained firefighter was at this fire and how he got burned. Well, there's a National Weather Service. It takes a long time for when they have a weather report of a storm. It takes a long time for that information to get to the field. And they're all on the same radio frequency. That's very complicated, and how it lines up with all their training. I tried to get all that information in there up front, because there was a storm 60 miles away, and they were just fighting this little bitty fire, 2 feet high. And all of a sudden, the downdraft in front of the storm, can have 60, 70 mile an hour winds. And even the helicopter in the sky did not see it. They saw it on the radar, but it was a long way away. They did not see it on the ground. And that thing came and blew the helicopter off the rim. came right at Dan. It was like a 60-foot wall of fire and just burned right over him, burned right over him. And,
Wow.
he had nowhere to go. Yeah. And he kind of, his partner was in the engine. The engine was burned over. It was black. It was on fire, and he was still trying to put it out, even though he was burned. And the guy inside was okay. He felt like he was in an oven for a minute, but he was okay. And he ran out saying, "Are you okay?" And he says, Dan's like, "I'm fine." And he's throwing off all of his hats and equipment and radio stuff. And it's too hot to touch. It's like all fried. And he says, "Yeah, I'm okay, but my stuff is too hot. Just call him and tell him we're burned over. We're burned over. We're out of the fight." And so then the chief shows up and he's looking at Dan going, "Okay, call an ambulance, call an ambulance." And people on the radio frequency are going, "Who's hurt? Who's hurt?" And so everybody's panicked now, like, "What do you mean you're burned over? Who's hurt?" And then they keep hearing Chief Hoffer's voice get more and more panicked. And he's like, "Get that ambulance here now." Because the more they were looking at Dan, his skin was falling off, and Dan's just looking at him going, "I'm fine." Because when you're burned, your nerves are burned off. You don't feel the pain. But that they call them the walking dead because their organs start to shut down. They get infections. They're going to die within a day, but they don't know that they're hurt. And so that's why they were working so hard to get him. In fact, the EMT that picked him up just took, they all know each other because they're all first responders in this one county. She took one look at him and said, "Load and go." And took 20 minutes to get to the hospital, and she thought he was going to die on the way to the hospital. And she said it was, one of the most profound experiences of her life, trying to keep him alive to get to the hospital. And so, and they finally did. And he sat there in the hospital and thought everybody was looking at him with tears and what's going on? Does everybody in this room think I'm going to die? Maybe these are my last words, And so they said, we're going to put you out. You're going to wake up in Utah. Salt Lake City is one of the best burn centers in the country. And then when he got there, the honor guard from Salt Lake Fire Authority, Utah Fire Authority, which is just amazing, that Utah has set up an honor guard, and they meet every plane coming in with a firefighter who's been burned, and they show up from cap to shine shoes and full dress uniform, and they stand over that firefighter until they die. And they met Dan, and they took one look at him, and they said, "Okay, this guy's going to die within 24 hours." And they were going to stand there and honor him until they did. And the thing is, he just never died. Actually, he was in a coma for like 24 days, and he did die 3 times, but they kept resuscitating him. And he was estranged from his family, but they all came running from all parts of the country, and they got together again to save Dan with one purpose. They were going to be there for Dan, and they were going to save him. They were there while he was in a coma. They were there when he woke up. They were there through the grueling recovery of burns, grueling. And the fire between his family and the firefighters in Red Lodge and the Utah Fire Authority, he was never alone. He was never left alone. And the recovery of burns is just, it's something that, well, there's a whole chapter that says, "Let me die." He wanted to die. He did not want to live through it. It was just so awful.
Yeah. So he died 3 times when he was in the coma.
Yeah. But they kept resuscitating him.
Yeah.
There was a DNR that his daughter supposedly had, but she didn't bring it with him from Ohio, with her from Ohio. So but Utah did not have a copy of it. And so they said, "Well, unless we have a copy of it, we're bringing him back. Get out of here,
Yeah.
Unless, so
Wow.
they just didn't have a copy of the DNR. So they kept bringing him back, and they kept calling security to kick his family out because they'd say, "He doesn't want this. He doesn't want this. Let him go. Let him go." And they said, "Until you show us a DNR, we're bringing him back." Wow. And they did. And he came back.
Yeah. So here he goes in, not expected to live. Like nobody has survived what he survived, right? Like everybody just knows.
Well, plus he was 65 years old, and he was on rheumatoid arthritis medication, which weakens your immune system. So yeah, they kept saying he was one of the sickest patients there. And they just never expected him to recover. It was, the odds were just not for him to recover.
Yeah.
But he did.
Wow. So surgeries and
Oh yeah. Yeah. They had, the skin grafts. Fortunately, he had most of the surgeries, the skin grafts, while he was in the coma. He had a few more after he woke up out of the coma. And, the 40% of your body that's not burned, that's where a lot of the skin grafts come from. So it really affects 100% of your body. And living with scars, living with burned skin for the rest of your life it never, that skin is never the same again. It doesn't stretch. It doesn't have moisture. It doesn't sweat. And so it's a constant monitoring throughout the rest of your life. You have the lotions you have to use. You have to stretch all the time. You wake up in the morning taking care of fake skin grafts, burnt skin. He said it's a disease like alcoholism. It's never something that goes away. Every morning you wake up and have to maintain your skin. And that's what he does to this day. Every burn survivor does. And if it happens to a kid, they have to have new skin grafts as they grow, because skin grafts do not grow as they grow. So every summer they're going back in to have new skin grafts as they grow. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Holy cow, that's a lot.
And he befriended one little kid, especially in there, and so he keeps in touch with him. And when he was there, when he walked around the floor that had all the burn victims, several of them were little kids, mini kids, and they called them littles. The littles were always in the rooms that he would walk around and see, and that helped inspire him. It was the other burn survivors that mainly got him to kick himself in the butt and get better, because he just wouldn't do it. He wouldn't ask for help. He wouldn't accept his new situation. He spent a long time just mad as hell, angry as hell, not accepting what's going on. The nurses didn't hate him. The nurses never hate anybody. They're angels, but they just said he was the meanest, worst patient, because he wouldn't do anything they said. He was mad all the time, until finally he saw the other burn survivors, and they came in and said, "Look at me, I've got a great life." And they have a line that says, "Between the past and the future is acceptance. And once you accept it, then you can start getting better." And then he finally did. Because a lot of them were amputees. He was having a hard time with his burnt hands. It took him like a month to go from lifting 5 pounds, 3-pound weights to 5-pound weights. But then a new friend of his that he met, didn't have any fingers. And he thought, well, geez, if Mark can do it, maybe I can do it,
Yeah.
And he hated the idea of giving up being a firefighter, but he started walking finally. I mean, at first he couldn't even get his feet turned up, he couldn't throw his feet off the bed and stand up. But then he took a step, then he took another step. And the next thing you know, he's walking around the floor. It was 19 laps around the floor to be a mile. So he really had a goal of making it a mile around the floor. And then there's something called a pack test to be a firefighter. Walking, it's 3 miles with 45 pounds on your back in 45 minutes. You have to pass that pack test to be a firefighter. And he just never thought, he could barely walk to the bathroom, let alone, walk 3 miles. But he all of a sudden thought, well, maybe after he got home, he said, I'm going to start walking again. And they said it would take 3 years to get back to normal. Within 2 years, he passed his pack test. I got a text that said 43:10. I said, what's 43:10? He went, that's the time of my pack test. So he passed his pack test. And the next week he didn't tell anybody he was going back to Utah to have one more skin graft. He said he was bleeding like a pig when he finished his pack test, but he didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
That's how tough he is. He's just a tough son of a gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he made it back to the fire line in 2023. Yeah. And he was a firefighter.
That's a lot of determination.
He was a firefighter again. Oh yeah. And then 2024 comes along, and we found out before we published the book, he had a painful cough, and we thought something was wrong. And right before we launched the book, he ended up starting chemo before he could fight fires in 2024. So he came off the fire line in 2024 to start chemo, and that helped him for a while. And then he started immunotherapy, and then now he's had a relapse. So he's always said, I've had a great life. If anybody felt sorry for me, I'd cut their head off. So people will just be happy for me. I've had a great life, and I'm still living in my home, Montana, and I have people to care for me, and that's all. That's it.
Yeah. Wow. So. Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the uniform that they wear, the gear that they wear is so vital. And
yes.
So part of the whole thing too was that letting people recognize the importance of it, and the importance of it being really good stuff, because holy cow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here he's at this small fire thinking this will be an easy one, or, we'll get this out. And then, is just blindsided by this wall of fire. So,
right.
It's a dangerous job.
Well, and they suit up and put on their gear, and it takes some time before they go out on the fire. And some of these small districts, 70% of firefighters are volunteer. And so many of these local little fire stations have no money. They depend completely on fundraising. And these guys will just jump in their truck and put on in their blue jeans and go out to fight fires. And they're not protected. People have asked me, well, what do I do to support my firefighters? Well, give money, have fundraisers. It's all really local. Do whatever you can for your local firefighters, your local firehouse, to support. Do they have the right equipment? Do they need a new engine? It's all local, and they do not have enough funds to do half of what they need to be doing. Because it's a professional job. It's a professional organization, and they have training all the time, and that's how they stay safe. They have rules and regulations. There's orders that they follow, protocol that they follow. And they were doing that the day that Dan got burned. I mean, there's, they try to get set up so that they set up a communication line. They do a weather check. They, turn everybody to the same frequency. All of that gets done within the first 15 minutes of setting up for the fire. And the IC had gotten there and was just getting set up. He was just getting ready to turn everybody to the right frequency. He had contact with the helicopters. I think they'd made one drop. They were getting ready to come in for another drop. And that was like the first 15 minutes. They had yet to get completely set up. The weather check had not come in yet. The frequencies were all not lined up yet when Dan was hit. So as much as they're setting up all their protocol, and that setup time is the most dangerous time in any fire. And then if the fire gets bigger, then they switch to a different type. It starts with a type 5 fire, which is the smallest. If it gets bigger, it goes to a type 4, then a type 3. Every time it switches to a different type, it normally switches to a different level of incident commander, because every incident commander is trained to be at a different level of fire. So when they change that management, then it also changes communication. And during that transition time, that's the most dangerous time in the fire, because everything's chaos and confusion. So it's always that beginning moment, that beginning time, that first 15 minutes of getting everybody on the same radio frequency, getting the weather check in, getting the plan in order. And they were just getting that done when the wind hit Dan.
Wow.
And they're all trained on all of these things. You're supposed to get a lookout established. Who's the lookout? Who's looking out for fire? They were just getting all that set up, just getting the plan set up. And poor Chief Hoffer, he was like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 33 years and I've never had a man burned. He had nightmares forever that it happened on his watch. It was. And the interesting thing about this was this, this was Red Lodge, Montana. And it's a town that sits right on the edge of Yellowstone National Park. It's a gateway to Yellowstone National Park. And it's surrounded by fuel, which is forest and grass. So everybody in that town is either part of the fire department or has a family member in the fire department. They all know each other. They all knew Dan. And that summer was the summer of hell. They still call it that. It started off with a local fire that came right over Mount Maurice, which is right on the edge of town, and was coming right at the town. They were about to evacuate the town. That was number one. Number two, there was a hiker a graduate of Montana State, was going on a hike, was going to hike the mountains, the Beartooth Mountains. And she was a very skilled hiker, but she didn't come back down. So search and rescue went out looking for her, and they looked for her all summer until they found her remains at the end of summer. And search and rescue comes out of the firehouse. So that was very low. And then Dan got burned. That was 3. And then right after that, another firefighter, beloved firefighter, was out skateboarding and fell and hit his head and ended up on life support. So he was on life support. They were searching for Tate, and Dan was in a coma in Utah. They were the whole town was praying all the time and the fire was not maintained until November. All of this was happening, and all the town, all they could do was be sad and pray all summer long. And then finally, Ryan did die, and Tate was found, but her remains were found. And they kept saying, Dan, you've got to live. Dan, you've got to come home to us. You have got to come out of that coma and survive the ordeal of these burns. You have got to live. We have got to have something good happen to us this summer. So, and I got to know the town. I got to know the firehouse. I got to know how awful that summer had been to them and how important it was for Dan to come home. And that was a huge part of the story, because when Dan and I first started this book, he really wanted it to be a fire book. And I realized, no, it's a human book. It's a human book, Dan. And, and all of this, and he didn't know any of this was going on while he was in a coma. I said, well, you're a third of the book, you're in a coma. So let's talk about all these people and all their emotions and everything that was happening around you, your family. This book is about your family, your community of Red Lodge, how everybody rallied for you to get to live and come home, because that's the story. And he would not have survived without all these other people. And he did realize that one of the reason he was writing this book, or wanted me to write this book, was to say thank you to the thousands of people who never get recognized, right? That do this job every day. They're good people who step up to greatness every day to bring people like him home, to make people like him live, and don't realize how important they are. Dan was like, let me die. And everybody's like, no, Dan, you've got to come home. We are hurting so much as a town. You've got to survive this ordeal and come home to us. That's it. That's all there is to it. And so he did. It was hell, but he did.
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah. So when things like this happen, which this is major, a one of a kind story, the fact that he survived, the fact that he went through all the stuff that he went through, and coming from this town that all is backing him, and firefighters, I'm sure, across the nation, across the world, were praying for him too. And so what are some of the things that you saw? You said that he was estranged from his family, but they all came. So, that's a miracle, right? To get everybody back together and to get them rallied around him. So what are some of the things that happened that you go, well, there's a silver lining somewhere, right?
The silver lining with his family, or with
with everything.
Well,
yeah.
Well, one interesting thing is that his brother played a major role, because his brother was in Seattle, and he had a sort of a patient advocacy background, that he had spent most of his life being a patient advocate. So when he found out, and he also walked with God a lot. I mean, that was his life. And so when he found out, the first thing he did was fall down and start praying for Dan. reached out to him mentally and said, I'm praying, I'm praying, I'm praying. And then he got in his car and drove to Salt Lake. And he got there and he just sort of took over. First of all, Dan's daughter was in charge. They were all the kids are grown up. Excuse me. So Dan's daughter had all the legal authority and was in charge. And so she dealt with the doctors, dealt with the finances, dealt with her mother, who was Dan's ex-wife. But Kelly, his brother, had such a knowledge of patient advocacy that he was a big help as well. And when Dan finally did come out of the coma, he wanted to go home so badly but there was still so much wound care to do, that which is debriding and bandage removal and repair. The bandages are called compression bandages, and they're very difficult to get on and off. And so Kelly learned how to do all of that for Dan, because that was the only way they would release him and let him go home, was if he had somebody home with him, continuing the wound care, continuing the bandage care. And the whole town said, well, we're all first responders. Half of us are nurses. We'll take care of him as well. And so he got out of Utah 2 months early because his brother Kelly went home with him, and because the whole town said, we'll get him to the doctor, we'll cook for him, blah, 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 blah. And that's what happened. They all wanted him to come home. It's much easier to care about somebody than to worry about somebody. Mm-hmm. And he went home early because he does not sit still. He could not stand being there, not at home. And see, the woman in his life had died a year before the burn, and he was already grumpy and miserable. And she had 2 grown daughters, and they came to Utah and helped. So they were in the rotation of the family staying with him. They all gave up their lives. Dan had 2 adult children. Marnie had two adult daughters, and his brother, that's 5 adults, were in a rotation of never leaving him alone.
Wow.
Along with the firefighters. Yeah. And they, you can imagine the disharmony in the family with the divorce and Marnie had died, and there were, there were adult children from different families. And then Kelly was but they all came together. They all got along to save Dan.
Wow.
To set up a schedule to be with him, and understand the medications and everything he needed. Whatever he needed, they did. Whatever the hospital wanted, they did. They just got along.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
They came together and worked together and made it happen for him. And I'm sure their relationship with each other changed along the way.
It did. Mutual, because they're all very good people. They're all very successful people. And they just put aside any of the old differences that they might have had and just said, we're family, you guys, and this is important. And the interesting thing is, firefighter families go through a lot, and the whole firefighter community, they all have families and they all support each other. Well, Dan's family had no experience being a firefighter family because he had started late in life as a firefighter. So none of his family had any experience as a firefighter family. And their first one was being thrown in to him being burned. They had a lot to learn. And the honor guard in Utah stepped up and helped them a lot. They met them at the airport. They lent them their cars. The honor guard really took care of Dan's family and taught them what it was like to be a firefighter family, which is very difficult. It's very scary. And, they just were overwhelmed, but they really came together and learned together and leaned on each other. So, yeah. And that's what the town was doing. Yeah. The town was leaning on each other. They learned how to lean on each other to get through this.
Yeah. I bet that's probably the most bonded town in the world, probably after going through that all together, right?
Yes, it is. And it was pretty bonded beforehand because, like I said, they're all related. They're either part of the fire department or they're related to the fire department. So, so they were kind of bonded before, but they learned how to survive. they learned how to survive. You know, we were looking for a happy ending to this book. And all the people I talked to in town, I said, well, did you heal? And they said, no, we'll never heal from this. But what we did learn was that we can survive hard things. You know, we are tough. But we always will have a scar, just like Dan has scars on his skin for life. The town will always be scarred by that summer. But we know that we are able to survive very hard things. And that is something to learn. And that is something special for this town to now know. And I thought that was a happy ending.
Yeah, no kidding.
And for Dan as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about you going through this experience?
It was tough, I got to tell you, because I interviewed about 50 people, and every one of them was emotional. Every interview was emotional because I was asking them to go back and remember what it felt like, what it was like. I interviewed his family. I interviewed the citizens of Red Lodge. I interviewed burn survivors. I interviewed all the doctors and EMT people, and they all had profound memories and experiences. And so when they would cry, I would cry. So I probably cried for 2.5 years putting this book together. And Dan and I cried. We would cry trying to put this book together. And then I would go and write something and put it together. And I sent it to Dan. I'd say, "Now, Dan, this is really tough stuff, and so you have to read it and tell me it's okay." And he'd say, "Well, it's the truth, isn't it?" And I'd say, "Yeah." He'd say, "Well, then put it in there," because a lot of what I wrote was, tough on him. Because he admitted, he goes, "I'm a jerk. I know," but he didn't use jerk as a word. He used another word. He said, "Yes, I am, but I know who I am, and take me or leave me," and that's who, he admits that that's who he is. Take me or leave me. I'm not changing. And so I was tough on him. I didn't make him out to be a hero that he wasn't. He's a tough son of a gun, and I made that pretty clear in the book. He likes to push people away. He's very distant from people, and so I made that pretty clear in the book. But he said, "It's the truth, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it's the truth." "Well, put it in there." I went, "Okay." So
what's interesting though is you said, as you were doing it, you cried together. So this tough guy, was crying.
Yeah. Well, and he was, and he hates to admit that now, but he admitted when he said this would happen in the hospital, and I cried like a baby, and he would tell me these things about when he would cry like a baby, and I put that in there. Over things like he would get so thirsty, and there's times when he couldn't have more. There's like something about not too much moisture with the burns, so they'd let him have ice chips. And when they finally let him have ice chips, he said, "I cried like a baby when they let me have ice chips." Isn't that weird?
Wow. Yeah.
And then there was another time when he had to learn how to swallow again after having feeding tubes and everything for like so long, and it was so hard to learn how to swallow again. And until he did, they wouldn't let him out of the hospital. And there was this one nurse that would come in on her day off and help him do the exercises. And he was telling me about it. And he started crying with me, saying she didn't have to do that. She came in on her day off and she helped me. And he started crying. He would tear up, remembering when people were really nice to him. When they did things that were extraordinary for him that they didn't have to do. And that's when he would start crying and remembering how good people had been to him. Or he like when he remembered the first time that a nurse, Emily, he still loves Emily, one of the nurses, when she, when he first leaned on her and she helped him stand up, and she was really short and he's 6 feet too. But she used all of her strength to help him stand up for the first time and take a step. He cried when he told me about that, so whenever he remembered things like, things that he just doesn't have he just doesn't accept people going out of their way to be good to him. And that really touches him, and he cries. So to capture that and put it on the page, to capture all the love and put it on the page, I had to raise my skills as a narrative writer because I've never thought of myself as a narrative writer beyond 2,000 words. So I had to really raise my skills as a narrative writer to capture the love and get it on the page.
Yeah.
Well, you must know. You're a writer. You're a writer. You know how hard it is.
Yeah. It can be, for sure, to try to put things into words. I mean, how do you put a beautiful sunset into words? I mean, there's so many things that are just difficult. Yes. Yeah.
Well, and how do you put these people's emotions into words? Because they could not give me the words. They honestly could not give me the words. They could only give me the tears. And sometimes I found myself imagining the scene because they couldn't really. I mean, I got a lot of interviews, and I finally had to imagine the scene of all the family members coming together. And I had gone to the hospital with Dan for his last skin graft, so I knew the waiting room. I knew the doors. I knew the rooms. I knew the floor. So I finally had to imagine what it must have been like for all the family members to meet in that waiting room. And so, because they never told me. So I actually wrote what I imagined as a scene of what it was like for them to meet each other. And so his brother read the first draft, and he went, "God, how did you write that scene of us meeting each other? It's like you nailed it."
Oh, wow.
I just sort of imagined. I said, I just imagined what it must have been like. I felt like I had to take some creative license in places. And he goes, "No, that's exactly what it was like." And I went, "Okay, yeah. Well, see how y'all really conveyed what your relationships were like." So,
wow,
so,
wow,
yeah.
Well, and accepting help is pretty humbling. So I would imagine for him, it was pretty humbling.
It was emotional for him. Yeah, for him, he to this day does not accept help. He just finds it so difficult to accept help, and he was helpless for months, and that was what was so hard for him, to be helpless like that, and to have to accept help from other people was so hard for him. And he was just bound and determined to get back to where he was. Yeah.
And he did.
So for anybody, he did.
Yeah.
For anybody to go through that and is difficult. But for somebody like him, tough Dan, I help you, you don't help me, And that's the way all first responders are. I'm the helper. I give you help. You don't help me. That's their attitude. And we talk about in the book how that mental attitude is not good for them. They need training on their mental attitude, not just their physical ability. And that they're trying to beef up that. They're trying to beef up that training now with mental and emotional ability, not just physical ability, in the firefighter world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's good that
so they can handle these kind of things. Yeah. Because it was difficult. It was difficult for the Red Lodge Fire Department to cope with what had happened to Dan, and so they finally did, but only with help. They brought in help to help everybody cope with it. Yeah, and the town, and yeah.
Well, and the two other things that happened at the same time, right? In the same summer.
That's right. Yeah. The whole town, the sadness of the whole town they needed help to cope with all of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. That's a lot. What is the population of that town? Do you know the population?
About 2,000. It's 2,000. It's the biggest town in the county. So it's a little over 2,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a Western town. The main street would make a perfect set for a Western movie. It's all antique buildings, antique shops. Yeah. Jeremiah Johnson was once the constable. The constable of Red Lodge. So gives you an idea of what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what an incredible journey it had to be for you to all of those interviews and the emotions and man. Yeah.
Well, and it helped. I mean, I learned so much from everybody. I had as an academic, I had already done some research on firefighting, burns, all treatment, everything I needed to know to talk about the how to and what had happened. But I, living in Montana, I'm very aware of fire season and what fire is like. But I'm not a firefighter. I'm not a fire writer. There are some very good fire writers, and even the fire chief looked at me one time and said, "Why isn't a fire writer writing this book?" And I went, well, I thought maybe he's right. Maybe a fire writer should be writing this book. But he said, but then Dan didn't ask them, did they? I said, no, Dan asked me. So I'm doing the best I can. But I try to do the best I could, and researching fire and researching the firefighter organization and the firefighter training. And so there's some technical stuff in here. The best I could do with all the technical information to make it make sense. I tried to write it so it made sense to me, at least, and not for a layman like me. I was not trying to write it for firefighter, organizations to be critical of, was it, it wasn't a firefighter incident report. There had already been a fire incident report about the event. So I wasn't trying to, emulate a fire incident report. I just tried to make it make sense to me as a layman, and so that other people could read it and go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Isn't that something, is that really what happened? Yeah, that's what happened. And I tried to also make characters out of the engines, because they all name their engines. They all have a favorite engine, and it was Dan's favorite engine, E78, that was burned over with him. And then when the new E78, they had to replace E78 as well. And so when he was fighting fires on the western part of the state, he sent me a picture of the new E78, and I said, "Is that the new E78?" He goes, "Yeah." And so that actually inspired me for the ending of the book. Was the new E78 was in the garage, and I said, that was sort of like, okay, he's back and so's his engine, kind of a thing,
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So what is Dan's hope for the book, and what is your hope for the book?
Well, mainly, one was to say thank you to everybody. We've had a tremendous response from the community, from Montana, from the burn survivors. All the burn survivors have been very happy with it. And the doctors involved were very happy with it. They thought that I got that part right. So, I've been told that it does a lot of people a lot of good. His brother Kelly died about last spring. Actually, he had a problem with pneumonia, and he just didn't recover from it. And it really did my heart good when he said, "This book is going to help a lot of people." And I was very thankful for that. And so I think it should, and I've had many burn survivors tell me that it's a very good burn book. It's going to help a lot of burn survivors. So that makes me feel good. And I felt so much pressure to get it right for the community, because they were all like, "Oh, we're really excited about this book." And so many of them were grateful that I memorialized that summer to them, for one thing. And it was such an emotional book for them. They were glad it's a quick read, but they said, I kept having to put it down to cry. I'm like, yeah, me too. And then they'd pick it back up. You have to put it down in places so you can collect your emotions. So I was very happy that all the people involved thought it was good. I had a lot of pressure on me that I got it right. And, you must know what that feels like, right? And so I mainly wanted to, memorialize the story accurately and make sure it was a good story, and get it out there to people, because it helps a lot of people. I had a few friends call me and say, "Boy, every time I see a fire engine go by now, I have a greater appreciation for those people." That's a good impact of the book. So if we can impact people's knowledge of firefighting, of burns and burn survivors, then I think we've done a good job. I had another friend buy about 10 and give them, they gave them all to all of their friends and said, "Everybody in Red Lodge needs to read this book so they're prepared for fire season." I went, okay. So I thought that was a good outcome. So, whatever, I think there's lots of ways this book helps the community and helps people. So that makes me feel good. Yeah.
Yeah. No kidding. So you reluctantly went into this project. How did you feel when it was done and you held the book in your hands?
I felt, honestly, we launched it in Red Lodge, and we actually had it was standing room only in the convention center in Red Lodge. Of course, it's a small convention center. I think about 200 people showed up. We sold out all the books that the Red Lodge bookstore had bought. They think they bought 500 for the grand opening. We sold out 500 books at the grand opening.
Wow.
And so, because we were there to sign, Dan and I were there to sign everything. And so that was sort of that was my day of, okay, we did it. It's done. We've got the books in the stores. It's kind of exciting because when the books were delivered to the bookstore and I opened the box and I went, oh my God, the books are on the shelf. Oh my God, I'm signing books to put on a shelf. I'm actually I'm an author. And it was kind of fun because this bookstore had all my children's books in their children's section. So I thought, look at that, so that day was, as you say, how did it feel when it was done? That was the day that it felt like it was done. Dan and I went back to his house in Red Lodge and I cried. And he looked at me kind of funny, like, oh, don't cry, stop crying. He whenever I did cry, he would say, stop it, just stop it. Say it. But I just said, this is just stress. The stress of it all was just overwhelming. So I guess I felt relief. I felt a lot of relief that it was done and people had accepted it. A lot of people had already ordered it online before that day and had read it. And so many of the people who had come to that event we spoke for a while at that event, and they were telling me that they loved it and they were very happy with it. And they really wanted us to sign the book they'd already bought. And they were very grateful. And so I was very happy that people liked it. I found out that they liked it at that event. And so I just felt like, I was like, phew. That's basically how I felt, was phew. I felt like okay, that I did it, it's done. Because there were times when I wasn't sure I could do it. There really were times that I was very worried about whether I was going to do it justice. It was so hard. It was so hard to do. It was very difficult to tell his story and the community story. Yeah. It was
that is a lot of pressure.
One of the hardest. Yeah, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine.
It was difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for sharing the story.
I'm just thrilled that you had me on to talk about it because now I'm just trying to now my job is to try to get it out to as many people as possible, and make sure that people read it and hopefully learn from it and enjoy it and get inspired from it, like you said, and it helps people.
Yeah. And where can people find the book? And how can people get a hold of you?
It's on Audible and Kindle and in print. All of those are available on Amazon. It's called Burned Over, The Survival of Montana Firefighter Dan Steffensen. And then I have a website. It's ajotjen.com, ajotjen.com. I think you've got my name spelled there, right? And then you go to books and then Burned Over. And all the information about it and where to find it is under ajotjen.com, Burned Over, books Burned Over. It's all right there.
Yeah. So, yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for undertaking the project and for doing it and doing it justice. And it is going to help a lot of people. There's no doubt about it. It already has, but we'll all more. So it's awesome.
Well, I really appreciate you helping me spread the word. It really helps a lot. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. This has been quite a conversation. I so appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. What an incredible story. What an incredible lady. What an incredible man. Like so much to it. I just appreciate it so much. And so thank you for joining us. And until we see each other again, I pray that you keep your heart open and live your love loud.